We spent a few minutes speaking before to prepare for this session, and I'm really excited to be moderating at this important historic time. So our panel is entitled A View from the Border, the Changing Security Landscape. And we're going to focus a lot on Europe, but we're also going to go beyond in recognition of the 28 countries that are present here today and talk about security more globally. But first we want to start with what's in our immediate neighborhood, which is the Russian-Ukraine war. And to refresh memories, in August 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. In 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine, annexing Crimea. In 2022, it reinvaded Ukraine. Reactions to each of these invasions were very different. In 2008, the US and others provided some support to Georgia and imposed some sanctions on Russia. But many did not see this as a portent of things to come. The focus was elsewhere, and the world moved on. In 2014, it was different. Russia was suspended from the G8, and broader sanctions were applied. Many countries moved to urge the US and other NATO members to reinforce the eastern border. They responded, but the focus was still very much on the fight against ISIL. And not all NATO members agreed that Russia posed a long-term threat. Fast forward to 2022, February 2022. The reaction was much stronger, it was swift, and it was global. Sanctions, in particular, were global and much more effective. Russia was isolated in most international forums, and the spigots of military assistance to Ukraine were turned on. As a result, NATO has been transformed, particularly with the new members that have come in, Finland and soon Sweden. But much more has happened as a result of this war. Energy relationships between the West and Russia have shifted. Global food prices and supplies have been affected, and new alliances or stronger alliances like the one between China and Russia have emerged. So joining us here today to discuss these issues are two incredible foreign policy experts. My notes had two women with deep foreign policy, but these are two foreign policy experts who happen to be women. Our first guest has held numerous high-profile positions, including serving as Finland's head of mission to NATO and to the EU. She's currently Director General at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and will soon return as ambassador to NATO, with NATO as a full member. So please give a warm welcome to Ambassador Piritta Asunmaa. And also with us, we have the U.S. ambassador, the former U.S. ambassador to North Macedonia, and who also served in posts that I've served, such as Greece, but she's also served at the U.S. mission to the OSCE and the U.S. mission to NATO. And she has a great job now. She is two things: the foreign policy advisor to the commander of U.S. European Command and the civilian deputy to the commander. She's also a member of IWF Florida, Suncoast. Florida, you're here. So please give a warm welcome to Ambassador Kate Byrnes.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I know you have crazy schedules. I wanted to start to talk about Finland. Finland sits in a strategic location. It shares a very long border and a long history with Russia. It also sits astride critical maritime routes, and it's an Arctic country. So, Piritta, I wanted to ask you, how has Finland's strategic location influenced its foreign policy, and what drove Finland to apply and successfully join NATO?
Thank you, Deborah. I would first like to point out that I do think that geography, or rather strategic location, actually influences every country's foreign policy. And in case of Finland, I think the defining factor has been that we do share the very long border, over 1,300 kilometers, 800 miles with Russia. And the history we have had with Russia has been rather tumultuous. We have had over the centuries a number of wars that have been fought on our territory. And we have been also part of the Russian Empire, and we only gained our independence 1917 after the Russian Revolution. In the Second World War, we lost 15% of our territory to Soviet Union. And during the Cold War, we were forced to follow a very strict policy of neutrality. So it was only after the collapse of Soviet Union that we were able to follow our European integration path. In 1995, we joined the European Union. And since 2014, as you were also referring to, the relations with Russia have changed dramatically. But it was only really last year that a profound change took place with the full-scale invasion in Ukraine. And that changed the perception of Finland, how we see our neighboring country, Russia. Despite the fact that we had good neighborly relations with Russia, we have had a very pragmatic foreign policy. But the fact that Russia could attack a smaller neighboring country that was military non-aligned, we realized that that could also happen to Finland. So there was an assessment of the security policy environment, and based on that, there was a decision with strong popular support to apply for NATO membership. And that was also supported by almost unanimous political consensus. So that's why we decided to apply for NATO membership.
And history is very important.
And geography.
And geography. Yeah. Well, Kate, I want to ask you, your experience in North Macedonia, and we spoke about this a little bit earlier, it took North Macedonia a number of years to come in. But Finland's accession, and Sweden's, is likely to take place in record time. In your view and your experience, what were the key elements for this rapid membership, and what does the alliance gain by having these two significant additional members?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and truly, as you said, it's actually historic how quickly Finland came into NATO, and Sweden soon too, we hope. And a lot of that is because Finland and Sweden have been strong partners with NATO for many, many years. So actually, since 1994, I believe it was, when Finland and Sweden both joined the Partnership for Peace, and since 2014, they have been part of what NATO calls enhanced opportunity partners. So in reality, NATO forces, US forces, and other members of NATO, we have been exercising and training and consulting together for many, many years. So from the US government's perspective, they were ready on day one when they made the political decision to join. And it was just a matter of working through the processes, and so that they were very much embraced. And in terms of what they bring to the alliance, first and foremost, they bring this shared values that are fundamental to our NATO commitments. They bring the experience of highly capable armed forces. They have strong security institutions and democratic governance institutions, which are critically important. And then they have particular expertise. Very strong experience, obviously, working in the high north and in the Arctic, which is an area of strategic importance and growing in strategic importance as we consider the impacts of climate change and strategic competition taking place. And actually, Finland just hosted a major exercise here that included 13 nations and I think 150 aircraft. So we brought our US forces here to participate and to learn from the Finnish armed forces and our Finnish hosts in terms of understanding how to operate in this kind of environment. And so those are really critical things. But I think Another fundamental thing, and something that we're really excited about that they bring into these broader discussions, is a comprehensive security model, one that takes into account this idea of societal resilience, and it looking at security in a very holistic, whole-of-government, comprehensive way, which is going to be how we help prepare ourselves to deter and defend against all kinds of threats in the future.
Well, I wanted to turn now to talk a little bit about talking with Russia. And Finland's had, as you mentioned earlier, Ambassador, a very practical relationship with Russia. And I know that over the years, in my experience, it often helped the United States government better understand their strategic thinking and so forth. How has this relationship changed since Finland began the accession process to NATO? I mean, what's the level of discussions that take place?
Thank you for this question. As I previously already explained, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has truly changed the nature of our relations with Russia. But I would also like to point out that actually the change in our relations precedes our decision to apply for NATO membership. And already, as EU member, we were part of EU's sanctions on Russia. The sanctions, very strong sanctions that EU already imposed in end of February, right after the invasion. And then Russia labeled all the EU members as unfriendly countries. And it is also obvious that Russia has never liked the idea that Finland would apply for NATO membership. But as it was already pointed out, we have been part of NATO's partnership program for almost 30 years, since 1994. And since 2014, we have been deepening our partnership with NATO. The reaction from Russia on our application was actually rather mild, to our surprise. It was clear that it came as a surprise to Russia. They were very occupied in Ukraine, and they were not really following what was going on in the neighborhood. But what has happened since? As we are an unfriendly country, there are no political contacts whatsoever. But this also applies to all the EU countries, so it is not only Finland. Mm-hmm. Our trade has collapsed. Before 2014, Russia was one of our largest trading partners. About 10% of our foreign trade was with Russia. Now it's less than 1%. Most of the Finnish companies have left Russia. And we don't permit any tourists to Finland. So actually there is very little border traffic because of that. So, but what is important, we have still tried to maintain certain level when it comes to channels of communication. Okay. So no political contacts, but at the level of civil servants, there are some contacts. But what is unfortunate, I don't see this relation changing in the foreseeable future because of Russia's aggression. And we see that Russia remains a threat to our security. It remains a threat to European security.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kate, I wanted to follow up. There are some established communication channels with NATO. Mm-hmm. One of them, called the NATO-Russia Council, has been effectively suspended. But there's also another one. The commander of U.S. European Command, who's also the supreme allied commander for NATO, can meet and talk with the chief of staff of the Russian armed forces. My question is since the invasion of February 2022, has this second channel been used?
So actually, the NATO-Russia Council that you mentioned, which was originally set up to be a forum for consultation and cooperation, since 2014, as you noted, all of that cooperation was suspended, and for good reason. But NATO took the decision at that time to keep the channels of communication open. And actually, the NATO-Russia Council met, I think, over 10, I think 11 times since 2014, including in January 2022. And the number one agenda item was Ukraine. And you'll all recall that at that time, not just NATO and the United States, but allies and partners in Europe and from elsewhere around the globe, were doing everything possible to diplomatically engage President Putin and Russian leaders and say, don't do this, don't choose this war, don't do what we all think you're planning to do. And at that discussion, it really didn't go well. A few weeks later, we were at the UN Security Council, and several weeks after that, Russia invaded Ukraine. But even then, last summer at the Madrid summit, NATO still agreed that while it revised its strategic concept so that Russia was no longer a partner, and remember, until that point, it was still listed in the strategic concept as a partner to work with. We all agreed at NATO that that could no longer be the case. But again, we reiterated that those channels of communication would be open to discuss if needed and to try to manage the conflict. And Russia has expressed no interest whatsoever in using those channels. Obviously, bilaterally, the United States has channels and very senior levels that we have used, particularly at critical points over the last 16 months when we've needed to engage. Other leaders have tried to do that as well. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is that Russia is not willing to have those kinds of conversations with us and to consult in a matter. And until that time, and we certainly hope there will be a time when we are able to come together and talk about these things, but it has to be a genuine interest on the part of Russia.
Well, I wanted to turn beyond Europe a bit and talk about the effect of this war on food, the supply and the price of food globally. A couple of statistics. Ukraine supplied 11% of the world's cereals and 52% of the world's supply of sunflower seeds and oils. So when the war began, Russia blockaded the main exports, which go through the Black Sea. And combined with a drought in Africa, obviously prices soared and there were food shortages in many parts of the world. Finally, there's been a deal negotiated between Russia, Ukraine, the UN, and Turkey to allow some exports to go through the Black Sea. It's interrupted here and there, but pretty much it's worked. So I wanted to ask the ambassador, can you talk a little bit about the food crisis and what Finland, I understand, has done on its own initiatives to address the food shortages, particularly, as I understand it, in Africa?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this question. I think it's very, very pertinent. However, I would actually like to concentrate on the root causes of the current food crisis. And I think it's extremely important to understand that this food crisis is really because of Russia's invasion on Ukraine and its deliberate actions, such as blocking the grain exports, as you pointed out, but also burning crops, destroying farming land with mines, and stealing Ukrainian cereals. And that is the reason that is provoking the food crisis. And I think it's also extremely important to emphasize that Russia's actions, such as the cause for crisis, as Russia is spreading disinformation, accusing sanctions imposed by the EU and its partners for this crisis. And I also would like to underline that these sanctions, they do not target the trade in agriculture and food products, including fertilizers, between Russia and the third countries. And none of the EU sanctions target transit. So it is possible to transit cereals and fertilizers, for example, through Finland. Mm-hmm. So we do allow that. So one cannot blame the EU and the sanctions for the food crisis. when it comes to Finland, we have been very active providing funding for humanitarian aid in order to ease the food crisis. In particular, through UN OCHA, we are one of the 10 biggest aid providers for UN OCHA, and also through World Food Programme, and really concentrating in particular to Africa.
Yeah.
And Kate, also, Ambassador, the U.S. has also participated in a number of initiatives to, relieve the food shortages and so forth. Can you comment a little bit on what the U.S. has done?
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for making the point about some of the wrong information that's out there about the effect of sanctions and all of this. I mean, first and foremost, we have been strong supporters of the Black Sea Grain Initiative that was brokered by the United Nations and also by Turkey and Turkey's leadership to help alleviate some of this and to work with European partners. Again, that never should have been necessary because it was Russia that put those shipments at risk and are the ones that are keeping it from flowing. But it's still an important initiative. Directly, the United States has long been, and I'm proud of this, has long been the largest single contributor to global food assistance worldwide. So, typically we've supported 40% of the World Food Program budget. We kicked that up in the last year because of Russia's actions. So it's even higher than that percentage now. And again, just for comparison, Russia pays less than 1% of that budget. Compare that to Finland and their contributions as a small country. Really, really impressive. So that's been very important. But the other piece of all of this, of course, is that in addition to the food and the assistance that's needed now, we need to be thinking about long-term food security. And so there have been a number of initiatives launched by Washington, but especially in coordination with our allies and partners, countries, but also the UN, the African Union. Last year, for example, we launched a global roadmap, or a roadmap for global food security, which brings together more than 100 countries to look at market access for farmers in Africa, particularly, and improving productivity. And then just a few months ago in February, we launched, as part of this, a very specific initiative to work with African farmers on things like improving healthy soils and getting access to and developing seeds and learning about regional crops that have a better odds of being sustained given the climate change impacts that have been imposed upon Africa. And so we're working through the entire problem set to address the challenges now, but also to make sure that we're coming up with global solutions, globally supported solutions for generations to come.
Well, we're going to continue going global. So we're going to talk about Turkey next. I believe we have representatives from Turkey here, several. Yes. I want to talk. Turkey's a key member of NATO. It did, however, hold up Finland's accession for a while and has not yet approved Sweden's. It did condemn the invasion of Ukraine. It has not applied widespread sanctions. It played a key role on the Black Sea Grain Initiative we mentioned to get food out. I wanted to ask you first, which is, what were Turkey's concerns about Finland's accession and how were these resolved?
Well, I do agree that Turkey is a key member of the alliance, and we discussed earlier this strategic location. Turkey is certainly in a very strategic location, but this location is also very turbulent, and therefore I think it's extremely important to acknowledge the threat of terrorism. Mm-hmm. It is a threat to the alliance, and it is a threat to Turkey, and we do need to take seriously these concerns by Turkey. And I would also like to thank Turkey, and it's very good that there is a Turkish representative here, for finalizing the Finnish accession. However, I would also like to add that for Finland, our accession to NATO is not complete without that of Sweden. Swedish accession is very important, not only to us, but also to broader security around the Baltic Sea. And therefore, we do hope that Turkey would very rapidly ratify also the Swedish ratification. What we did in order to address the concerns by Turkey, there was a high-level meeting at the level of heads of state and government in Madrid, with the NATO Secretary General also taking part. And there in Madrid, we agreed on a memorandum of understanding on key issues raised by Turkey, on counterterrorism and arms export. And ever since, we have met several times in trilateral format. The last meeting actually took place yesterday in Ankara. And our understanding is that both Finland and Sweden have now implemented their commitments under this agreement. And we do hope that also Sweden would be a member by the Vilnius summit next month.
Good news. Yep. I know the U.S. has very strong military ties with Turkey that sometimes are the steady rudder in our political relationship, which has varied. How has that worked in this process of expanding NATO? Kate, if you could take that one.
Yeah, so of course, Turkey has been a really important security partner, a member of NATO since 1952, so a close partner throughout the alliance as well as with the United States. Turkey has a special place in my heart because it was also my first diplomatic posting, and it was a wonderful experience. But honestly, when I talk about the mil-mil relationship, as you mentioned, has been profound. We have truly espoused the same roles. Ambassador Asunmaa talked about the important role that Turkey plays in governing access in and out of the Black Sea, extremely important. That is NATO's vital eastern anchor. But Turkey has also played a vital role in deploying with us. It was a leader in security in Afghanistan, continues to still be an important player in many of our other missions, standing side by side with our forces, with other NATO forces. So a tremendously important security relationship. But they're also a very important political partner, both of NATO but also of the United States, with their insights and experience that they bring to the entire region, as well as an increasingly important economic partner, which we take into account as a member of the G20 and in other aspects. So that is a very critical relationship. When it comes to Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO, again, we could not have been more thrilled when they took the political decision to join NATO, and we made that very clear. We said that publicly. But the credit really goes, I think, to the leaders of Finland and Sweden and of Turkey to come together, because NATO accession is a process, and every member of NATO has to understand very seriously that the commitments that they're taking, they have to respond to each other, they have to have that dialogue. So we have been supporters of those conversations. We also agree that clearly Finland, but also Sweden, have addressed those concerns, and we are ready to see Sweden join NATO as soon as possible. It is a matter of urgency, I think, in this moment, that they be part of this collective alliance that shares these same values, and we're very much looking forward to that happening very, very soon.
We're going further out. China. China and Russia forged a closer relationship in recent years. China abstained from several UN resolutions condemning the 2022 invasion of Ukraine and is helping Russia buy its oil. On the other hand, it has reached out to the president of Ukraine and has appointed a special envoy to try to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. So, Piritta, if I can ask you, what can you tell us about the EU's perception of China, including its possible role in a peace process?
Thank you. That's really an extremely important question. And first of all, I would like to point out that actually there has been a lot of convergence both within the EU, but also between the EU and US when it comes to our perceptions on China. Already in 2019, the EU actually adopted a new China's strategy, where China is labeled as partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival.
Covers every all true.
Very useful, very useful. But I'm afraid that lately the emphasis has been very much on competition and rivalry. It's also the public perception here in Europe that has grown much more negative due to China's own actions, especially when it comes to human rights, but also China's very assertive foreign policy in its neighborhood, including Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And a special concern for us has been the deepening partnership between Russia and China. And for us in Europe, and certainly also for the US, an absolute red line would be if China were to provide lethal aid to Russia. Mm-hmm. We are also in the process of assessing our critical dependencies on China and trying to find ways to address these dependencies. We have been doing that at the EU level, but also nationally here in Finland. We actually just produced an assessment of our critical dependencies. Yet, at the same time, we also must acknowledge that China is a very important trading partner to Europe, but also to the US. Mm-hmm. And what we don't want is decoupling. We cannot have economic decoupling, but there is a new concept. We talk about de-risking, making our trade relations, our economic relations less risky. And when it comes to war in Ukraine, China has made clear that it would like to play some kind of a mediator role. It has presented a paper with its own peace plan. And of course, it is important that China takes the war seriously and tries to help to end the war. But all the efforts must be in line with the peace proposal of Ukraine, of President Zelensky. He presented his peace formula. And whatever peace initiative is taken forward, it must guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. And this is the message that we want China also to deliver.
Well, Kate, if I can ask you, what are the implications for the US of this growing relationship between China and Russia?
Well, first of all, I will associate myself with absolutely everything that Piritta just said, which I think speaks exactly to the point about how close the US, the EU, and European countries have come in this conversation. It's very critical. We have to remind that since the start of this conflict, China has not played a constructive role. It has not condemned the violations of sovereignty and territorial integrity. As a member of the UN Security Council, it has not espoused the values that are in the UN Charter. So we would like to see it play a much more constructive role on this issue. Actually, my Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, is headed to China in the next couple of days to have a broad conversation. But number one issue is going to be to send a very clear message that they have to do the right thing when it comes to Russia, condemning Russia's actions. And then, if they want to be a partner in a peace initiative, as Piritta said, it has to be one that is based on respect for international principles, that allows Ukraine a legitimate place in the conversation. And again, they've been hesitant to have these consultations with Ukraine. So that's really important that those phone calls between President Xi and President Zelensky are now happening. And it has to really take a responsible role. So we hope that they will be part of a global constructive process that brings President Putin to a negotiating table to negotiate what has to be a just and durable peace. And that is not going to be an easy question, but we will be ready to support that process when it happens. More broadly, when we talk about that influence here in Europe, we do have concerns. And we have concerns about some of the practices that we've seen the People's Republic of China take here in Europe. So part of the conversation that we now have with our European partners is about managing this relationship. And exactly as Piritta said, it's not about decoupling, it is about de-risking and ensuring that we are managing this competition collectively together in a way that avoids crisis and conflict, because that's the ultimate goal.
My next question, I was going to not do it because I wasn't sure we'd have time, but I think it's really important, so I'm now unscratching what I scratched out. And that is, what is happening within Ukraine in terms of it becoming a testing laboratory for new kinds of weapons and information systems? The U.S. European Command covers 50 countries, including NATO and non-NATO members, and Ukraine, and does many, many activities, training exercises. My question, Kate, is how has the war changed the type of training that countries are requesting from U.S. European Command?
So it's a great question. We've learned a lot from a military perspective from the war in Ukraine. Again, lessons we wish we'd never had to learn. But first and foremost, we were not prepared. We were not ready, not the United States, not our allies and partners for the kind of conventional war, the land war, and the level of atrocities, let alone the use of new technology and other things to attack civilian populations. And again, it's not only just what you see in terms of bullets and ammunitions, but it's this attack on critical infrastructure happening in the cyberspace. It's, trying to undergird Ukraine's electricity grid so that people are frozen during the winter. I mean, these kinds of tactics that are just truly unimaginable, let alone, disinformation, and Piritta referred to some of that. So we are thinking through all of this. We are thinking about how can we be ready to defend our NATO allies, as we have a commitment to do so should something like this ever happen to them. And that means investing and spending effectively and smartly in our defense technologies. It means sharing information and best practices, which is something that we learned, particularly in the run-up to Ukraine and since then. So while we have to manage competition, we have to protect sensitive technologies, we also have to come to some arrangements with our allies and partners so that we can share technologies. We have to move towards more interoperable and even interchangeable equipment as we make these decisions so that we can come together collectively to address many of these concerns. And that also means that when we train, when we exercise, as we did here in Finland a couple of weeks ago, we have to bring all of this new reality into those exercises. So, while we're not only practicing the movements of aircraft landings and refueling, we're practicing how does this maneuver also complicate what we have to manage in the information in cyberspace. And we are looking at, again, approaching all of these matters from a very different way. I will just add, though, that EUCOM is one supporter of these training and exercises, but more often than not, they are exercises that are hosted by our allies, and our U.S. forces are learning as much from these engagements as anyone else in the alliance. And it's truly that coming together and learning from the historical, geographical, and professional experiences of each other's military and civilian leadership that we all get stronger.
We could go on and on. We know we stand between everyone and lunch, and we want to get questions from everyone. So we hope questions have been coming in as we discuss different parts of the world. If they don't appear, believe me, I'm backing up here. I got plenty. Excellent question from Jessica Lacroix, IWF Canada, Dallas, and Texas. Ooh. How is Finland responding, officially and unofficially, to Russian declarations that it will be moving nuclear weapons closer to the western borders? Start with you, Ambassador.
Thank you for this.
And you, Ambassador.
Thank you for this question. We in Finland, but not only in Finland, also the EU and NATO, I think we are all extremely concerned about Russia's not only declaration to be moving nuclear weapons on Belarusian soil, but also the nuclear rhetoric that President Putin and Russian officials have been using all along, making it sound like using nuclear weapons would be a normal way of conducting war. And this coming from a country that is a permanent member of UN Security Council and a privileged party to nuclear non-proliferation treaty. We are also very concerned that Russia has withdrawn from New START treaty, and we really call on Russia to return to implementing the treaty as soon as possible.
I would agree with all of that. I would simply add that we haven't actually seen any indications that Russia intends to use these weapons, which gives a measure of security. But as Piritta says, this kind of nuclear saber rattling is extremely dangerous. It is dangerous, and it should be a global concern. And I think that's why it's so important that we officially say and unofficially through whatever channels, and sometimes the United States doesn't have the best channels, and sometimes that's other countries, but we have to keep repeating that message that this is not the kind of talk that we should be hearing in the world today, not in 2023.
And I know one historical fact: Ukraine had nuclear weapons, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, it agreed to give them up in return for assurances, which it got from the US and UK, that it would be protected against an aggressor. Moving to another question. How do you view Germany's role in affecting change and achieving more stability, especially after finally publishing its national security strategy? And this comes from Susanne Schroeder of IWF Germany. Anyone would like to take that one?
I'll be happy to, because I am based in Stuttgart, Germany. Germany is our host country for many of the US forces in Europe, and we are there at their invitation and with their support, and they are a vital security partner. We were very pleased yesterday to see the national security strategy released, and also to note once again the amount of convergence between what Germany is laying out as the fundamental challenges, not just here in Europe, but around the globe, with the view of the United States. And the closer we come to sharing those threats assessments and to looking at this as a global, an alliance responsibility first and foremost, but as a global responsibility secondarily, the better we are. So I think Germany plays a vital role on the continent, within the European Union, certainly within NATO, from a bilateral perspective with the United States, and increasingly, I think they have an important role in the globe and an important voice as we have these conversations that need to be extended beyond the borders of North America and Europe.
And I'm actually happy to tackle this question as well. I'm afraid I still haven't read this new strategy, but I did print it last night before leaving the office.
Maybe Suzanne's read it. You can tell us.
Well, it's over 70 pages, so. And actually, I'm heading to Berlin on Tuesday in order to meet with my German colleague and with my future German colleague, the future NATO ambassador, really to discuss Germany's role in NATO and also in the EU. And for a small European country, we certainly would like to see Germany playing even a more prominent role in European security. And we have to acknowledge here in Europe that it is the European countries that need to play much more prominent role, and there we like to see Germany really taking the lead. As the US has been concentrating already much more on Asia, as China is the biggest security challenge for the US, we here in Europe, we need to be much more capable, much more willing to take more responsibility for our own security and also for the stability of our neighborhood. And really, Germany is the key here.
Yeah. And Deborah, if I could add, Germany right now is hosting the largest air exercise that we have seen since the end of the Cold War here in Europe. Germany is the host of that, and we are all learning from their experience, so we very much appreciate that.
Well, we have one last question, and then I have a wrap-up question to ask you. And this is from Kathleen Camilli of the Women's Forum of New York. Do you believe Russia is thinking long-term and strategically about its decision to invade Ukraine, or have they been surprised by the global reaction? If so, how can they diplomatically retreat? Not an easy question.
I don't know if you want to start.
Well, maybe we can do the following.
Yeah.
I think we can wrap this into what I was going to ask at the end,
Yeah.
which is for each of you to comment on how critical this moment is today to European and global security.
So one to the other. Okay. I'll start and I'll leave the
Okay.
last word
Gives you
to our host.
flexibility here.
Okay, so the way I'm going to approach it this way. I had the opportunity to attend the Munich Security Conference earlier this year, a major and very important policy forum that happens every February. And it was interesting because as we sat around and we talked, one thing that was remarkable was the agreement about Russia, that this was a full wake-up call, and that the signals that we had heard in 2008 in Georgia, the speech that Putin gave to the Munich Security Conference in 2009 when he laid out this globalist, global imperialist plan and some of these messages, we didn't quite hear it. As you noted, in 2014, we only partially heard it. But in February of 2023, there was almost nobody at the Munich Security Conference that wasn't saying, okay, now we understand where he is headed and where Russia is headed under President Putin, and we have to be prepared to respond to that, to defend Ukraine, but also to be prepared to defend our alliance from any further aggression, because it's clear that that's where he's headed. So the stakes and the consequences, just talking about the Russia problem set, are very, very high. But to go back to your point about the criticality of this moment, I mean, it is important that we maintain the support that we have provided for Ukraine, for courageous Ukrainian people who've been fighting for their very existence, for their homeland. I mean, it's truly amazing, truly inspiring, and we can't let up on that. We also have to be prepared to defend our own countries, but also those countries on the periphery of Russia, because they are not out of danger under this imperialistic vision that President Putin has laid out. But we also have, and again, to look at these things in a more hopeful and a positive way. And one of the reasons why I love the job that I'm in right now is that we have an incredible opportunity to get this right. We have this incredible strategic convergence. My boss has called it a time of historic strategic convergence between the United States and Europe in how we approach the world. I think we have a fresh perspective about the need and the manners of engaging countries outside Europe. So it's not just a matter of how we talk about issues, but what we do that sends a message. If we really truly want to have a global partnership, we have to think differently, we have to engage differently, and we have to include them in a global process if we truly want to. And I think that we can achieve through this convergence the respect for those fundamental security and human rights principles of the UN Charter, but also to build more of a collective and an affirmative economic and technological future for all of our countries, for all of us who share these values, who want to boost our competitiveness, and who want to protect that well-being, that human well-being that we talked about in the very first panel.
Well, I cannot say anything else that I completely agree with you. We have been discussing a lot about Ukraine and European security, and it is true that this is really the critical moment for us here in Europe. And all we need to do right now is commit ourselves for helping Ukraine to win the war. This is the key right now. But we also have to be committed to helping out Ukraine in reconstruction, and also for integrating Ukraine in the Euro-Atlantic community. Ukraine is already a candidate country to the European Union, and eventually Ukraine will be a member of NATO as well.
Great point.
But, as Kate was saying, we cannot forget the global perspective. We are in a very different world now. We are moving to a multipolar world. And what we need there is closer partnership for all of us who believe in a rules-based international order, the order that was created after the Second World War. And we really need partnerships in order to defend that. And therefore, I think it's very good that we can talk about that in a conference like that. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Thanks a lot. That's great.
Well, I want to thank you, Ambassador Asunmaa and Ambassador Byrnes, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your views, and I think you deserve a great round of applause. It's been awesome.